Game of Thrones, The King's Court Wizard. Chapter 11, The Castle of Harrenhal. The first impression Raymond had of the wizard was mystery. Wrapped in an emerald green cloak with a hood covering his face, he exuded an aura of mystery and danger. However, as soon as he removed the hood, revealing his face, Raymond had another impression. It was nobility, beauty, and kindness. Raymond had to admit, the gods had their favorites, and the young man before him was exactly one of the gods' favorites. He was around 20 years old, with pale skin from lack of sun exposure. His hair was black, completely black, like a crow's feathers. Silky, shiny strands fell below his eyes. His features were sharp, elegant, and naturally symmetrical. Beyond his impressive appearance, what mattered most were his dark green eyes like beautiful emeralds. Cadmus Peverell, Lord Hand. Cadmus introduced himself with a polite smile as he placed his hand over his chest and bowed slightly forward. "I'll get straight to the point, Cadmus." Raymond didn't care about Cadmus's elegant actions and spoke in a solemn tone. "Are you sure you can cure the queen with one of your potions?" It was his career he was talking about. There was no room for jokes or hesitation. If it weren't for Geralt, he wouldn't have even met Cadmus. After all, a wizard was a wizard, dangerous and mysterious beings. "If she's not dead, I can cure her." Cadmus spoke in a solemn tone. He wouldn't play around with his future career. If Rilla died, he would have serious problems. Raymond's expression became slightly relieved, but only that, slightly. Placing his hand on Cadmus's shoulder, he spoke in a tone tinged with a touch of hope. "I'll have them bring some sick people. I want to see your skills personally." Cadmus nodded and wasn't surprised. Trusting a complete stranger only happened in children's books. Adult life was much more complicated and full of dangers. Only a fool would trust a person they had just met, especially in such an important matter. Half an hour later, Raymond returned bringing about 11 people, 6 men and 5 women. What they all had in common were humble clothes and traces of illness on the faces of each man and woman. Cadmus didn't hesitate and began taking out potion after potion, feeding these people the semi-transparent green liquid. Seeing these people's faces become healthy with the naked eye, Raymond finally showed a smile and looked at Geralt gratefully. This was a real wizard, not a charlatan. Moreover, with his sense of profit, he could see that these potions were simply a gold mine. All people get sick, from commoners to kings and queens, everyone gets sick. A potion that could cure an illness in such a short time was simply a gold mine that even Tywin Lannister would be full of envy. "Cadmus, what do you want? Lands, titles, or women? Once the queen is saved, I can ask the king for these things," Raymond said in a confident tone. Rhaegar wasn't a petty king and was generous with rewards. "I want to participate in the king's court. If possible, I want a position on the small council. The court wizard seems like an interesting title." Cadmus didn't hide and spoke directly about his purpose. The frankness only showed that he would do everything to save the queen, because he wanted to enter the court and couldn't fail. Raymond was surprised by Cadmus's request. He looked at the young man with admiration and felt more secure in introducing Cadmus to the king. Stroking his chin covered by a thin beard, he spoke in a confident tone. "If it were any other wizard, this could never happen, but with your potions, the king should value you and the position of court wizard doesn't seem so unrealistic." Raymond didn't lie. Rhaegar really should be happy to win over such a talented person. Although recruiting a wizard might offend the faith of the Seven, the king was already in conflict with the faith of the Seven, as he had married 2 wives, Queen Elia and Queen Lyanna. Cadmus showed a satisfied look. Having the hand of the king as a political ally on the small council would be a good thing. "If the king accepts, a member of the king's guard will come get you," Raymond said before leaving the tent, heading toward the castle. Raymond stopped before the door to the king's chambers. 2 members of the king's guard had their hands on the hilts of their swords, faithfully guarding the door, and if anyone dared approach without permission, they would have their head separated from their body in a mere instant. I wish for an urgent audience with the king. Raymond said before the two legendary knights before him. Sir Barry Stan Selmy, the bold, and Sir Arthur Dane, the sword of the morning. Barry Stan looked at Arthur and nodded. He turned and knocked on the door and spoke in a calm tone. Your Grace, the Lord Hand wishes an urgent audience. Let him in. Rhaegar's voice sounded a few seconds later. Under the eyes of both knights of the King's Guard, Raymond entered the room. The first thing he saw was the king, sitting behind a dark wooden desk with one hand on his forehead while the other wrote a letter. Raymond, if you came because of another conflict between those knights, I swear I'll send you to the wall for a month. Rhaegar didn't stop writing and spoke in an irritated tone. It wasn't just Raymond who was already fed up with the constant fights between the young knights. It's about the Queen Dowager's health. As soon as Raymond spoke, Rhaegar stopped writing and finally raised his head, looking at Raymond with his deep purple eyes. Rhaegar was an extremely handsome man, worthy of holding the title of the most handsome man in Westeros. Medium-length silver blonde hair framed a face that seemed to be made by the gods. He wore red and purple clothes, extremely beautiful and luxurious. At 39 years old, he was a mature man in his prime with a perfectly groomed beard around his face, making him even more majestic. What happened? Rhaegar frowned and asked in a hurried tone. His mother's health had always been a thorn in his heart, always making him feel worried. Raymond didn't hesitate and told everything that happened, hiding nothing. Unlike other hands of the king, he knew he should be sincere and frank above all before Rhaegar. The previous hand of the king, Tywin Lannister, had become practically taboo to speak of before the king. Rhaegar listened to everything in silence. After processing all the information, he leaned back in his chair and showed a thoughtful look. Court wizard. Rhaegar whispered with a calm look. Honestly, it wasn't a bad idea. He could fight on the battlefield, but when it involved monsters, magic, and the mysterious, he was a complete layman and the Maestas weren't suited for the job, as few dealt with magic, or rather, they repudiated magic. At the same time, what really caught Rhaegar's attention were the potions mentioned by Raymond. Substances like these are worth true fortunes. After all, no one is free from getting sick, and the nobles, above all, never hesitated to spend exorbitant sums to save their own lives. The profits from healing potions were simply colossal, and that considering only Westeros. If trade reached Essos, then the gains would be unimaginable. Rhaegar, who for 14 years had dedicated resources to building an army for House Targaryen, knew better than anyone the cost of this. Maintaining 40,000 men would consume incalculable wealth from the royal coffers. With more money, he could increase the army by 20,000 soldiers in just 1 year. Raymond, I want to meet this wizard and see his abilities with my own eyes. I want to know exactly how powerful he is. Rhaegar made his decision without hesitation. As for the church, he simply disregarded it. It no longer mattered what they thought of him, especially after they called him the second coming of Maegor the Cruel for taking his second wife. I'll do as you command, Your Grace. Raymond bowed and left the king's chambers with a relieved expression and a smile on his lips. Rhaegar looked at the ceiling of his chambers and showed an amused look, thinking about the legends of wizards he would hear when he was growing up. How interesting, it will be the first time I see a wizard. I wonder if he can turn people into frogs. Chapter 12, The Meeting Between the Wizard and the King. Cadmus looked at the king's guard guiding him with curiosity. He looked at the legendary sword drawn at the king's guard's waist and spoke. Meteor fragments are rare, especially a piece so large. Depending on the size, they break apart when entering orbit and scatter into small fragments. Does House Dane still have any piece of the meteor? Cadmus asked curiously. If possible, he really wanted to acquire such good metal. Arthur was surprised for a moment, but shook his head and answered in a calm, deep tone. My ancestor used the entire meteor to make dawn. What a shame, that iron is good for making cauldrons. They don't explode, which, believe me, happens many times when someone is in the learning phase. Cadmus said in a slightly regretful tone. He had lost count of how many cauldrons had exploded trying to improve his potions. Improving a potion isn't easy, any change in ingredients is enough to blow up the cauldron. Arthur looked at the wizard wearing a cloak and hood with a deep gaze. Honestly, he didn't trust the wizard and didn't want the king to be near such a man. He could protect the king against men, but it was difficult to protect against magic. Is Sir Arthur afraid I'll hurt the king? As if noticing the caution in the legendary Sword of the Morning's gaze, Cadmus asked with a smile. Yes. Arthur didn't deny it and spoke in a calm tone. I feel you're dangerous. I am. Cadmus nodded and also didn't deny it, but continued speaking. But just as you will protect the king from men, I will protect the king against mystical forces. Arthur looked deeply at the wizard and continued on his way. Cadmus didn't mind and would prove it with actions instead of words. Suddenly, when Arthur and Cadmus turned the corner, two women appeared before him, accompanied by another king's guard. One of the women had brown hair with silver streaks and purple eyes, olive skin contrasting with the yellow dress. She was beautiful with delicate and graceful features, with an hourglass body, voluptuous in the right places. Unlike the woman with clear Dornish and Valyrian descent, the girl beside her looked like a pure-blood Valyrian. She was a fine and delicate beauty, almost supernatural. She was slender and small, with large eyes of a deep violet tone and thin, pale, porcelain skin, almost translucent. Princesses, Lord Commander. Arthur greeted the princesses and the elderly man with respect. The man was Gerald Hightower, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard and known as the White Bull. He was a middle-aged man at 45 years old, half his hair was graying, but his skill remained the same and even more deadly. The Lord Commander of the King's Guard nodded to Arthur and looked at Cadmus with a penetrating and hard gaze. Who is this? Rhaenys asked, looking at the mysterious man wrapped in an emerald cloak and hood. Daenerys, beside her niece, also looked with curiosity at the mysterious man. As if feeling her gaze, he turned his head and looked toward her. She saw his lips curve into a very beautiful smile and for a moment, glimpsed a pair of beautiful emerald eyes staring at her. Despite not being able to see his appearance, Daenerys knew he was a very handsome man, especially seeing those full and tempting lips. She wondered what it would be like to kiss those lips. Suddenly, noticing her own thoughts, she shook her head. Dany, you're an elegant and graceful princess, you can't have these types of thoughts about a strange man, but what if I get to know him? Cadmus didn't know what was going through the hormone-filled mind of the girl. He was focused on the aura that Daenerys exuded. He couldn't help but take a deep breath, feeling the absurd amount of magic dormant within the girl. And although it wasn't as great as his, it was incomparable to anyone else. Worthy of being the daughter of destiny of this universe. If Daenerys focused on fire magic, Cadmus could see that she would become one of the most powerful sorceresses this world had ever seen. Looks like I found my Artoria Pendragon. Cadmus thought with a smile. A guest of the king. Arthur answered Princess Rhaenys in a respectful tone. He didn't go into details because the king had asked for discretion, so he introduced Cadmus this way. Rhaenys and Daenerys' curiosity reached its peak at this moment. The more mysterious Cadmus was, the more curious they became. However, seeing Arthur's silence, they knew they couldn't get anything out of the king's guard and left reluctantly. Before leaving, Daenerys winked provocatively at Cadmus, who returned it with a friendly and amused wave. Daenerys laughed and left with Rhaenys. Arthur looked deeply at the wizard, but said nothing and guided him to the king's chambers. Which took a while. Harrenhal Castle was truly enormous. Harren the Black must have been truly mad to build such a large castle. When Cadmus arrived at the door, he saw another legendary knight of the King's Guard, Ser Barristan Selmy, the Bold. He had to admit, Rhaegar really was lucky to have so many legendary knights of the King's Guard serving him. Cadmus looked curiously at the old man before him and knew he was even more dangerous than Gerald Hightower, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard. Despite being old, just the man's name was capable of stopping 1,000 knights. "The king is waiting." Baristan spoke in a solemn tone. He looked at Cadmus cautiously, but opened the door. Cadmus didn't hesitate and entered the king's chambers. Arthur and Baristan entered the room. How could they allow the king to meet with a wizard alone? As soon as he entered, Cadmus soon saw his target. After seeing Rhaegar, Cadmus had to admit that George Martin was a man of culture for creating the Valyrians. Whether men or women, all were beautiful. Although Daenerys was the most beautiful girl he had seen in his life. Nodding to Raymond, who was in the room, he greeted the king. "I am Cadmus Peverell, your grace. It's an honor to meet you." Cadmus placed his hand over his chest and bowed slightly forward before King Rhaegar I Targaryen, the king of the Seven Kingdoms, known as the Just among the people. "Will you hide your face before your king?" Rhaegar asked, seeing that Cadmus's face was still hidden under the hood. Cadmus let out a laugh and removed the hood, revealing his absolutely beautiful young face, hair black as a crow's feathers and emerald green eyes. "You're young. I thought you'd be an old man with a pointy hat on his head." Rhaegar was surprised by Cadmus's appearance, but soon smiled and joked. "If your grace wishes, I can fly on a broomstick." Cadmus joined in the joke and said with a laugh. By Merlin, he didn't like flying on broomsticks. After all, it was extremely uncomfortable for men to sit on a broomstick. "I'm curious, but not now." Rhaegar shook his head and looked at Cadmus with a bright gaze. "I'm curious about magic." Cadmus smiled and felt he had waited a long time for this moment. He drew his wand, under the curious and cautious eyes of everyone, and pointed at the wardrobe. The next moment, a blue light appeared at the tip of the wand and hit the wardrobe. The next moment, a pig with a classic wizard hat appeared under the shocked eyes of everyone present. Even knowing that magic existed, seeing it in person still made Rhaegar's eyes widen. Especially something so shocking as turning a wardrobe into a living pig. "This is transfiguration. I can transform anything I desire," Cadmus explained with a smile, but added, "Of course, this change isn't permanent. It takes some time for the pig to turn back into a wardrobe again. So, no infinite food and no turning stone into gold." Rhaegar was disappointed to learn it wasn't a permanent change. It could be said that if it were a permanent change, he would never have to worry about feeding his army or even running out of money in his life. Of course, he knew that if an infinite amount of gold appeared in Westeros, the currency would devalue and a really big crisis would be placed upon Westeros. "Let's get down to business, Lord Peverell." Rhaegar straightened in his chair and spoke in a solemn tone. Now that he knew Cadmus wasn't a charlatan, he really wanted the wizard in his court. Cadmus also showed a solemn expression. After all, it was his career they were talking about. Chapter 13, The Meeting Between the Wizard and the King. 3 sick people were brought before everyone. 3 men, 2 young and 1 elderly, all 3 commoners. They looked scared before the king, the hand of the king, and the king's guard. Which was perfectly normal. "This is a healing potion, obviously, as the name indicates it's for healing," Cadmus said with a smile as he showed the vial containing a semi-transparent green liquid and explained with a patient look. "There are no side effects and it cannot heal broken bones, but it can cure almost all types of illnesses. Only illnesses that are not related to magic." "Can it be mass-produced?" Rhaegar couldn't help but ask with an excited look. He seemed to see a mountain of gold filling the royal coffers. "It's possible. I can optimize the process so that common people can make it. Although the effect might be reduced by 30 or 40%. As a potions master, Cadmus was confident that after some training, he could get common people to produce the healing potion. Although the effectiveness of such potions could not even remotely be compared to his own. What if the recipe leaks? Raymond couldn't help but ask in a solemn tone. Just thinking that this kind of recipe could leak, he felt a pain in his heart. This recipe was like an infinite gold mine, the mere idea that the crown's enemies could obtain it was terrible. We can make an unbreakable vow with these people, if they dare to betray, they will die instantly. Cadmus spoke in an indifferent tone. Seeing the confusion on their faces, he calmly explained. The unbreakable vow is an extremely powerful spell made by two people. If the other party breaks the terms of the vow, they will die without any shadow of a doubt. Rhaegar's eyes lit up hearing about the spell. It was truly a perfect spell for a king. Unfortunately, he wasn't a wizard. We'll talk about that later, let them drink the potion. Rhaegar spoke in a calm tone and looked at the potion with a bright gaze. Barristan took the healing potion and made all three men drink it. Even scared, they didn't dare refuse and drank it all at once. A few seconds later, the old man, who looked hunched over with terrible back pain, straightened up like a young man in his prime. The old man touched his own back in disbelief and, feeling absolutely nothing, showed a look of joy. The terrible pain in his back had completely disappeared. The remaining two young men who had the flu and a fever magically improved, as if they had never been sick. A relieved look appeared on Rhaegar's face. With this potion, his mother would recover her health without any difficulty. Personally confirming the effectiveness of the healing potion, he looked at Cadmus with a satisfied gaze. Waving for Barristan to take the commoners away, Rhaegar turned to Cadmus with a smile. Lord Peverell, from today on, you are the court wizard of King's Landing, responsible for the protection of House Targaryen and events related to magic. If you manage to cure my mother, I will give you lands and a title. Rhaegar made his decision in an instant. He was never a petty person when it came to winning over supporters. Cadmus looked surprised at Rhaegar and nodded. He took a step forward and bowed elegantly. It is an honor, Your Grace. I wish to make an unbreakable vow between myself and House Targaryen. Cadmus said with a smile. He knew better than anyone how powerful he was. If there wasn't some kind of security, King Rhaegar would never trust him. How do I make this unbreakable vow? Rhaegar asked with a smile. He really liked talking to intelligent people. It saved a lot of unnecessary time and headaches. While holding my wrist, say your name, the terms, and if I find them suitable, I will accept the terms. Cadmus said in a solemn tone. He extended his arm, which Rhaegar promptly held firmly. Cadmus also held his arm and looked into the king's eyes. I, Rhaegar of House Targaryen, first of my name, King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. Do you swear never to harm me or my family, unless someone in my family attacks first? I swear. Cadmus replied, without the slightest hesitation. After all, the vow was between him and Rhaegar. Members of House Targaryen could still attack Cadmus, and if he couldn't defend himself, that would complicate things. Do you swear to serve me with all the knowledge and power you possess? Rhaegar continued. I swear. Cadmus affirmed, firmly. Do you swear to protect the king from all forces of evil and any monster? I swear. As Cadmus and Rhaegar exchanged words, everyone around witnessed white threads appearing in the air, faint at first, then intensely luminous, winding and intertwining around both their arms. I, Cadmus of House Peverell. Cadmus declared, his voice firm. Do you swear never to harm me or my family, unless someone in my family attacks first? I swear. Rhaegar replied, in a grave and solemn tone. Do you swear to share bread and water with me, and that I will always have a place at your hearth? Cadmus asked, keeping his gaze fixed on the king's. I swear. Rhaegar said, without any hesitation. Do you swear never to betray me? Cadmus asked again. I swear. Rhaegar affirmed, and the next instant, the white threads shone like living fire before disappearing into the air. Your Majesty. Cadmus bowed with a smile on his lips. My court wizard. Rhaegar also greeted Cadmus with a smile. Want to test the oath? Cadmus asked in an amused tone. I won't die. Rhaegar asked confused. Unless the act is actually carried out, we will only suffer a pain so strong that we will beg to die. Cadmus said with a smile. Rhaegar was speechless, but nodded. He was curious if the unbreakable vow was really working. Drawing his sword from the scabbard, Rhaegar pointed it at Cadmus. The king's relaxed face became tense the next moment. He turned pale, the veins on his face contorted grotesquely as he breathed heavily. Only when Rhaegar lowered the sword did the pain disappear. He leaned on the desk under the worried eyes of the king's guard and the hand of the king, Rhaemon Darry. Damn, that fucking hurts. Rhaegar couldn't help but curse out loud. He finally believed in the oath he had just taken. For the first time he saw that words had power. Cadmus drew his wand and pointed it at Rhaegar. When he wanted to attack the king, the pain began. His already pale face became even paler, if that were possible. The veins on his face contorted grotesquely as he felt a simply indescribable pain run through his body. Damn, that hurts. Cadmus also couldn't help but curse out loud, making Rhaegar laugh, almost guffawing. Cadmus and Rhaegar looked at each other and laughed, feeling a trust in each other. Betrayal resulted in death and only a fool would kill himself for some stupid profit. I am at your disposal, Majesty. Cadmus said with a smile. The first step of his plan was a total success. How could he not be happy? His political life had just begun and he aimed for much more. He wanted Westeros to become a home for his school of magic. You will be presented at the small council meeting that will take place in Harrenhal. Rhaegar nodded and spoke with a smile. Gaining a talent like Cadmus was a surprise he didn't expect when he held this tournament. Your Grace, I have to report an unusual occurrence that happened when I was walking along the King's Road. Cadmus spoke in a calm tone. Then, Cadmus spoke about the attack of ghouls on the King's Road and their abnormal quantity. Rhaegar frowned and showed a trace of coldness in his gaze. He knew that the old lion was conspiring against him again. It was a subtle and difficult way to prove that it was Tywin who committed the crimes. Does he think he's untouchable because of his gold? Rhaegar showed a sarcastic smile. He was no longer a prince without much power, he was a king, and even if Tywin did everything, the people would be on his side, because he was the Orthodox king and no one could shake that. Cadmus didn't comment. He had just arrived and as a newcomer, he should listen more and speak less, at least for a while. Besides, Rhaegar didn't need his advice to deal with Tywin. I will treat the Queen Dowager, Your Grace. Cadmus said with a smile. Hearing this, Rhaegar put all thoughts aside and focused only on helping his mother and nothing else. Chapter 14, The Meeting Between the Wizard and the King. The Queen suffers daily from chest pains, headache, dizziness, ringing in the ears, weakness, blurred vision, and nosebleeds. Rhaemon spoke about the Queen's symptoms with a worried look. It could be said that he lost many nights just trying to find a cure with the maesters. Walking towards the Queen Dowager's chambers, Cadmus was accompanied by the king, 2 members of the king's guard, and Rhaemon, the hand of the king. He listened to the Queen Dowager's symptoms and couldn't help but be surprised to realize the queen had hypertension. Does the queen like to eat food with salt and fry meats in lard? Does she do any exercise, train with a sword, or walk? Cadmus asked. Although lard for frying was expensive, it was expensive for commoners. A queen could naturally eat such rare fried foods for the common people at will. My mother likes to eat fried chicken, especially with the skin. As for salt, all her food has salt. She doesn't exercise or train. Rhaegar naturally knew his mother's daily routine. He was an intelligent man. After hearing Cadmus's questions, he knew that these were the cause of his mother's illness. Your mother has hypertension, a common illness for those who eat a lot of salty food and are sedentary. In short, just put her on a strict diet and have her do some training sessions 2 or 3 times a week. Cadmus said in a calm tone. He was a wizard, and every wizard was a scholar, especially a potions master like him, who knew well all the benefits and side effects of the ingredients. Essentially, he was also a doctor, as he cured people with specific potions for different illnesses. Lord Peverell truly has a lot of knowledge. He seems more like a maester versed in the healing arts. Raymond said with a touch of admiration. He had never heard some of Cadmus's words, but he felt that these words were quite appropriate and sounded very convincing. "Don't compare me to the butchers you call healers and maesters," Cadmus said in a helpless tone. The healers and maesters of this era were essentially a bunch of butchers who liked to use bloodletting to cure patients and milk of the poppy. And although bloodletting could relieve some symptoms, this technique, which consists of making the patient bleed in large quantities, definitely couldn't cure anything. Remember, bloodletting only helps relieve some symptoms of only a few specific illnesses, but it doesn't cure anything. Many times, it kills more than the illnesses themselves. Cadmus spread knowledge to the king and those present. He didn't want to see any of these people dead because some idiot said that bleeding a lot can cure something. Everyone nodded. Cadmus's abilities brought a confidence that they could trust his words. After a while, everyone arrived at the queen's chambers. Rhaegar walked to the door and opened it. Seeing that his mother and his two wives were dressed appropriately for visitors, he opened the door for everyone to enter. As soon as he entered the room, Cadmus's gaze fell on the woman in bed. At 53 years old, the Queen Dowager of Westeros looked like a very beautiful woman. Her skin was pale from lack of blood and her eyes slightly sunken. However, the woman's beauty still existed, a true queen milf in every sense of the word. "Will Rhaegar accept me as a stepfather?" Cadmus thought amusingly as he saw the beautiful Queen Dowager lying in bed. His eyes fell on the other two queens in the room. Elia Martell was beautiful, slender, with black eyes and a flat chest. She wore a yellow dress with orange tones. Her skin, like her daughter's, was a very beautiful olive color. The queen had a gentle and elegant smile on her face. Unlike the queen consort, the girl next to her, Lyanna Stark, seemed completely the opposite. Tall and thin, with brown hair, a long face, and gray eyes, she was a beautiful woman, but she had a completely different posture from Elia. She seemed more like a wild beauty. She had a quite brave and sharp look. If Cadmus had to describe the woman who married into the civil war in Westeros, he would summarize Lyanna as a tomboy, yes, quite masculine behavior for the men of this world. Rhaegar had the elegant and sweet Elia and the wild and brave Lyanna. Cadmus had to admit, the king knew how to have fun in bed. Husband. Seeing Rhaegar's arrival, Elia greeted her husband in a gentle and sweet tone. Rhaegar. Lyanna smiled at Rhaegar and greeted her husband in a cheerful and lively tone. Rhaegar approached his two queens and kissed each one's lips with a gentle and tender look. He was obviously a husband who loved his wives. Who would this gentleman be? After the kiss, Lyanna asked, noticing a very handsome young man with black hair and emerald green eyes. Rilla also looked at the young man with curiosity. Placing his hand on his chest, Cadmus introduced himself with the most beautiful smile he possessed. "I am Cadmus Peverell, the court wizard of King Rhaegar, my queens." All three women were surprised by the introduction and looked at Rhaegar with a touch of confusion and curiosity, as if asking if it was true or just a joke. Rhaegar nodded and spoke in a calm tone. "It's true, he is my court wizard. He will protect me and the members of House Targaryen with matters related to magic and other mystical things." All three women showed surprised looks. They looked at Cadmus with intense gazes and full of curiosity about the new member of the small council. Cadmus laughed, drew his wand and waved it with a flick of his wrist. The next moment, the flames of the torches seemed to come to life, transforming into 4 fire dragons and flying elegantly around the 3 queens. After the fear, there was an exclamation and soon the 3 women showed admiration in their eyes. This was a true wizard, not a charlatan pretending to be one. Magic has always been something that brought fear and fascination to people. Rhaegar also showed a surprised look, but soon calmed down. Compared to the fire dragons, seeing a wardrobe turn into a pig was even more shocking. Mother, besides being a wizard, Lord Peverell is the one responsible for curing you. I thank you in advance, Lord Peverell. Rilla looked at Cadmus and showed a fragile smile on her pale face. She was already tired of spending her days lying in bed and was genuinely grateful. As for whether Cadmus could cure her or not, the queen didn't think about it for a second. If Cadmus couldn't, there was no reason for Rhaegar to have brought him. Before curing the queen, I want to check her body for any other problems, Cadmus said with a smile. After seeing the queen nod, the wizard pointed his wand at Rilla and began to investigate the queen's body. Under his surprised eyes, a translucent figure floated out of Rilla's body. Surprisingly, this figure looked like Rilla. She was standing with her arms open as she slowly spun in the air. The translucent figure showed different colors for each part of the body. Green for healthy, yellow for some organ damage, and red for emergency. Most of Rilla's body was yellow. She was a woman over 50 years old and didn't exercise, so it was normal for her body to be in this stage. With a normal diet and exercise, the yellow color could turn into a faint green. However, ignoring the faint red parts near the heart, Cadmus's gaze was looking at the veins in Rilla's body. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes seeing the extremely red color running through the bloodstream. Poison, Cadmus thought with a calm look. Seeing that the poison only acted in the bloodstream and didn't damage the organs, he knew it was a slow-acting and possibly non-lethal poison. The poison was harming something and he needed to know what it was. The queen has to stop eating fatty, fried, and salty foods, as well as start doing some exercises like sword training or even walking for some time every day, Cadmus said with a smile. He clearly wouldn't say that the queen was poisoned. He would talk to Rhaegar in private. My fried chickens. Rilla showed a pained expression, making Elia and Lyanna laugh. The atmosphere in the room became lighter with the queen's joke. I would like a drop of the queen's blood for further testing, Cadmus added with a smile, something Rilla didn't refuse and extended her hand to Cadmus. Cadmus pricked Rilla's fingertip and extracted a few drops of blood before closing the wound with magic, which made everyone marvel at the magic again. Putting away the vial containing the drops of blood, Cadmus took out a green potion and handed it to the queen while speaking in a solemn tone. Just drink this and the queen will be well again, but as I said before, this will only cure the symptoms, not the root of the problem, so the queen has to adjust her diet and start doing physical exercises. Sounds just like my father talking, Rilla murmured to herself with a smile, but didn't hesitate to drink the potion. It was strangely tasteless, as if she were drinking water, but with a slightly different taste. Seconds later, Rilla felt her mind clear. The tiredness and dizziness she felt completely disappeared, even her skin gained a touch more color. Thank you, Lord Peverell. Rilla sat up in bed and spoke in a grateful tone. I am at your disposal, my queen, Cadmus said with a perfect smile on his lips. Chapter 15, The Poisoning Case. As soon as Rhaegar left the room with Cadmus, Rhaemon, and the 2 members of the King's Guard, the gentle smile on his lips disappeared. He looked at Cadmus with a sharp and oppressive gaze. Tell me, what did Lord Peverell find in my mother's body? Although Cadmus had hidden his emotions well, the person before him was a king, one of the humans most capable of discerning a person's intentions. After all, a king's basic quality was to try to see people's thoughts through their expressions. Give me 2 hours and I'll bring you a complete answer. The mage looked at the king and spoke in a calm tone. Cadmus didn't speak directly about his suspicion of poison. He could be wrong. After all, there were some blood diseases. Therefore, he needed some tests to draw conclusions. Just tell me something, Rhaegar said in an equally calm tone. Is it very serious? Cadmus nodded his head. If his suspicions were correct, it was a very serious matter. So serious that it would shake the entire kingdom if it were true. Rhaegar took a deep breath, clenched his fists, but soon relaxed again. He looked at the room behind him with a somber expression. He only hoped that his mother was well, he wanted nothing more than that, something any son could want for his mother. Barry Stan, guide Lord Peverell to a private room and protect him. Leaving those words, Rhaegar left with Arthur Dane. Cadmus looked at the king's back and let out a sigh. Being a king wasn't so easy, especially with the Second Civil War getting closer and closer. "Follow me, Lord Peverell." Old Barry Stan spoke in a harsh and solemn tone, but without the previous animosity and caution. With the unbreakable vow, Cadmus couldn't hurt the king. He had personally seen what effects the contractor would suffer just by thinking about hurting the other contractor. Barry Stan then guided Cadmus to a room not too far away and stood at the door, protecting the room with a cold and relentless expression. His hand was on the hilt of his sword, ready to draw the sword at any moment. In the room, Cadmus wasted no time and took a work table from his bag. This table had all the items he needed to begin his experiments. Taking Rhaegar's blood, Cadmus placed a drop of blood on a small glass square, then another drop on a small glass square and repeated the process 8 more times, totaling 10 blood samples. The first thing he did was place the blood under a magnifying glass, which looked more like an extremely realistic eye, and magnified the image of the queen's blood. The first thing he noticed was a substance that was attacking the white blood cells. And if anyone knows something basic about biology, they know that white blood cells are responsible for a person's immune system. If something is wrong with the immune system, the patient will at the very least be exposed to diseases much more easily than anyone else. Honestly, this poison in adult men and women won't have much effect, but when a person gets sick with this poison, it will practically increase the chances of mortality to extremely dangerous levels. Not to mention that for babies and the elderly, this poison is basically lethal. Cadmus couldn't help but take a deep breath upon learning the effects of the poison, remembering how many babies Queen Rhaegar lost during and after pregnancy. A shiver ran through Cadmus's body. This poison wasn't just cruel, it was simply inhumane. Especially remembering how many stillbirths, miscarriages, and infant deaths occurred with House Targaryen over the past nearly 300 years. Cadmus practically saw a huge cemetery of children and babies before him. After learning the effects of the poison, Cadmus began to extract samples of the poison from the queen's blood. It was such a small amount that it was only possible using magic, but Cadmus was confident he could reverse engineer and reconstruct the poison. Once you have the poison in hand, it's easy to make an antidote. 2 hours later, Cadmus already had a flask containing 100 ml of a colorless and odorless liquid. Looking at the liquid in the flask, Cadmus couldn't help but think that such a small thing was capable of killing countless people without them even knowing about it. Storing his work table, Cadmus wasted no time and left the room, where he found Barry Stan still standing by the door. "Sir, Barry Stan didn't need to stand guard at the door, I know how to protect myself," Cadmus said with a serious look. He really didn't need protection, he could reduce someone to ashes with a wave of his wand. The old knight's protection was useless to him. "I'm following my king's orders, Lord Peverell." Barry Stan spoke while walking beside Cadmus, always looking around for any dangers. Although it was unlikely to happen, the castle was heavily guarded, not to mention that the king was protected by Arthur Dane, a man who could kill dozens of assassins as if they were chickens. Cadmus nodded his head and with quick steps, walked rapidly toward the king's chambers. His eidetic memory had already recorded the exact location of the king's chambers. Barry Stan felt that something was wrong with Cadmus's haste and couldn't help but feel a tightness in his chest. As soon as Cadmus entered the king's chambers, he noticed that it was already dark through the window and the number of torches around had increased, but the atmosphere was tense and shadows moved around with the flickering flames. Cadmus found Rhaegar behind a desk signing something. The king was truly hard-working. With his arrival, the king stopped writing and looked up, staring into Cadmus's green eyes with a deep and almost frightening gaze. "It's poison." Cadmus got straight to the point and spoke. He took it from his bag and placed the flask containing the poison on the desk. Rhaegar's face turned cold, He looked at the colorless poison in the glass flask. A complex emotion passed over his face, before a chilling coldness appeared in his eyes. He stood up and stood before the window with his back to Cadmus. Arthur and Barristan gritted their teeth. Both were furious for not protecting the queen from being poisoned. What does the poison do? Looking at the moon rising in the night sky, Rhaegar's voice sounded cold and emotionless. It attacks the immune system. Cadmus said in a calm tone, but thinking that the king wouldn't understand these modern terms, he began to elaborate. The human body is something highly complex. It wants to stay alive at all costs, so it creates countless defenses to fight diseases. Imagine an army inside the human body fighting against any disease and unknown things. That's the immune system. For young and adult men and women, the poison doesn't have much effect, but when the host gets sick, the poison attacks the human body's immune system, thus preventing the body from recovering from a disease. The poison basically increases the mortality rates of someone who is sick. Another thing worth mentioning is that this poison is particularly lethal for babies, children, and the elderly, as the immune systems of these types are developing or are too old. This poison is chronic, so they poisoned the queen when she was still young, perhaps at 13 or 15 years old. If I were to say precisely, I would say it was at the moment she became pregnant for the first time. As soon as Cadmus finished speaking, a frightening silence hung in the air. The sound of gritted teeth sounded particularly clear. Are you sure it wasn't because of incest? Rhaegar's voice sounded a minute later. His voice was tinged with a faint hope that he didn't even realize. Cadmus didn't hesitate to respond. If that were really a problem, old Valyria would have disappeared in the first 100 years and wouldn't have lasted 5,000 years. In just 3 generations there would be deformed children, with mental problems, and perhaps they wouldn't even walk. Blood magic is magic that can alter the human body. Vampires and werewolves are some of the experiments of Valyria's blood magic. The dragon lords of old Valyria were so good at blood and fire magic that they practically created a civilization based on it. With the amount of blood that was used in annual sacrifices, I doubt they even got sick, gaining a pseudo-immortality. Cadmus stopped speaking and looked at the king, who was still with his back to him. My king, I have something else to report. Cadmus spoke in a calm tone. Speak. Rhaegar's voice sounded deep, but Cadmus knew the king was furious. It's likely that the poison has passed from mother to child and so on, although in smaller doses, that is if they weren't poisoned again. Arthur and Barristan became as cold as the winter of the north. They drew their swords and knelt before Rhaegar. We failed to protect you, my king. Both spoke at the same time. The swords were placed on the ground as if they wanted Rhaegar to kill them for failing to protect him. Sheath your swords and stand up. Despite Rhaegar's words, Barristan and Arthur remained kneeling, too ashamed to do anything else. Have you become so rebellious that you no longer consider me your king? Rhaegar's voice rose this time. There was deep anger in his tone. In the same instant, Barristan and Arthur stood up, but still had their heads down. Raymond. Rhaegar's voice sounded again. The hand of the king, who had been in the room the whole time, stepped forward. My family has been poisoned. There are 3 suspects. The Faith of the Seven, the Maesters, and House Lannister, possibly all 3 together. I want you to search for everything, medical reports and any records of diseases over nearly 300 years of my house. Rhaegar said in a cold tone. He already had the suspects, he just needed some evidence. As for proof, he didn't need proof. He was a king. He wasn't a weak king. He was a king who would make the 2 oldest organizations in Westeros know the pain of a father, brother, and son. Cadmus, if I ask you to fight politically against the Faith of the Seven, will you accept? Turning to look at Cadmus, Rhaegar asked in a calm tone. You didn't even need to ask. I'm a mage and they're clerics. We've been enemies since I joined the court of House Targaryen. Cadmus said with a smile. Rhaegar nodded and extended his hand. Cadmus understood what he wanted to do and took the king's blood and placed it in a flask. "If I have poison, I'll bring the rest of the family to you," Rhaegar said in a solemn tone. "Don't worry, your majesty, the antidote isn't so difficult with the poison in hand," Cadmus said in a confident tone. "I hope so," Rhaegar replied in a deep and tired tone. Chapter 16, The Poisoning Case. "I see that everything is well, the king seems to treat you well," Gerald, sitting on the couch, commented seeing the huge room. The entire room seemed full of colors and alive, totally different from what people might assume when thinking of castles. Seeing the liquid slowly dripping into the flask, after a long process of purification, heating, and movement, Cadmus showed a satisfied expression and looked at the Witcher sitting on his couch. "Of course, I'm a member of the small council and court mage," Cadmus said with a smile and looked at the Witcher with a grateful look. "All thanks to you, you grumpy old Witcher. You have my gratitude." Although he could do everything alone, Gerald helped him save a lot of time, so he was genuinely grateful. Gerald nodded his head and showed a calm look on his face. Just be a good lord and help people, even if just a little. He didn't do it just to help Cadmus, he also had reasons to help. After all, having one more friend inside the center of political power was something very good for him. "However, I just entered the court and I'm already involved in a major conspiracy." Cadmus spoke in a calm tone, but his lips were curved in a smile. "Politics is complicated, however, I like these conspiracies, assassinations, and duels of intelligence." Gerald raised his eyebrow but didn't ask which conspiracy. If there was something he learned throughout his life, it was not to meddle in matters that didn't concern him. This saved him from losing his life or even going to prison countless times. "The church will react, how will you deal with them?" Gerald asked in a calm tone. Knowing these stupid septons well, he was sure they would react drastically. They would try not only to tarnish Cadmus's name but also say that he whispers the influence of hell in the king's ear. There were 4 types of people the church hated most: mages, witchers, bastards, and kinslaying. Since Cadmus fit into one of the categories, Cadmus had no doubt about what would happen. "My dear friend, are you underestimating me?" Cadmus asked in a curious tone and with a smile. "I'm not underestimating you, but certain things can't be done with force," Gerald said in a calm and deep tone. He didn't doubt Cadmus's strength. A being capable of creating a magic tower and controlling an entire forest was far from being classified as weak, but force isn't always the right option. Cadmus gave a laugh but didn't explain to Gerald, he was a mage, and a mage wasn't someone foolish. Of course, he knew that force sometimes would only make things worse. He couldn't just burn down Old Town, right? Since he decided to join the court of King's Landing, he already had a solid plan to deal with the great influence of the Church of the Seven. Only a fool would think of fighting alone against an organization with more than 6,000 years of existence. Moreover, he never underestimated the power of faith in common people, so for his future plans, he had to damage the foundations of the Church of the Seven. What can damage the foundations of a church? Obviously, the believers and faithful. Once that is shaken, the church won't have as much power as at this moment. Gerald looked deeply at Cadmus and didn't comment. He drank the glass of wine with a harsh and resolute expression. "I'm leaving," he said, drinking the last drop of alcohol in the glass. "I'll return to the north to investigate the Whites and the White Walkers." Gerald felt that the return of these creatures so close to the wall was something incredibly suspicious and dangerous, especially because Cadmus had said that a great war between races could come. Witchers weren't born just to hunt monsters. 8,000 years ago they were born to fight against these humanoid creatures. "I'll invite my Grand Master and 5 more Witchers and we'll depart beyond the wall," Gerald said in a calm tone. There was no fear and uncertainty in his voice, only the determination to fight to the death against these creatures. Cadmus lost the smile on his lips. He opened his bag and threw 3 items to Gerald. who caught the item still in the air. Gerald looked at the items and saw that it was a dagger, a ring, and a necklace. Although I'm not very proficient in alchemical items, I still have some knowledge. Cadmus spoke in a calm and solemn tone. The dagger is made of dragon glass, it's capable of killing the White Walkers, in addition to being embedded with fire runes, capable of generating a normal blade. The ring has a spell called Protego, which can protect you from physical and magical attacks for 30 seconds. The necklace has a spell called Revelio, it's capable of revealing any magical item or creature. It's not single use, the runes will recharge themselves, but it takes about a day. Gerald nodded his head and stored all 3 items carefully. Cadmus had just given 3 items that could be used as heirlooms for thousands of years among noble houses. Especially the ring, which could create an energy shield against physical and magical attacks, was a ring that would be worth more than a Valyrian steel sword. Don't think Gerald was wrong. Prince Aemon, son of Jaehaerys I, died because of an arrow. If he had a ring like that, the course of the entire history of House Targaryen would change completely. Don't die, in the great war that is to come, we'll need experienced witchers like you. Cadmus said in a solemn tone. He knew that the long night would come and with it, all kinds of monsters coming from hell. Humanity really needed experienced witchers like Gerald, who were experts in killing monsters. Gerald nodded his head and spoke in a calm tone. If fate wills it, we'll meet again, boy. Yes, old man. Cadmus said with a smile. Gerald said no more and left without looking back. He was used to goodbyes, especially with his witcher profession. Don't die, Gerald. Cadmus said, letting out a long sigh. He knew the numbers of whites beyond the wall. It was a number so large that no army could fight head-on. They didn't need to rest, eat, or drink water. They were an army that all kings wanted, as they wouldn't spend anything on logistics. The wall must not fall, dragons must also return to life. Cadmus murmured with a touch of helplessness, there were many things to do in little time. Remembering Daenerys, he showed a smile and whispered. It seems I have to talk to my lovely Artoria Pendragon. After all, without dragons, the war could take a very different course, and unlike the series, dragons weren't so easily killed. They had scales as hard as rocks and an ability to breathe fire capable of burning an entire city. Such weapons of war were essential on the battlefield. House Targaryen must have dragon eggs hidden somewhere. Cadmus continued to murmur, countless ideas bubbled in his mind. Making the dragon's hatch wouldn't be something difficult, especially with Daenerys by his side. Taking a deep breath, Cadmus set these thoughts aside and focused on the most important thing, the antidote for the poison in the queen's and king's bodies. Yes, after checking Rhaegar's blood, he was also poisoned. He had to admit, the faith of the Seven was cruel to try to control the numbers of Targaryens being born. Cadmus presumed that all members of House Targaryen were poisoned, perhaps even the 2 queens were. However, this poison is irritating. Even with the antidotes ready, none had the expected effect. Cadmus murmured, seeing his countless flasks. They were his failures, about 21 failures in total. It seems it's not a common poison. I must use blood magic to remove the traces of poison. That was the conclusion Cadmus made after conducting 21 experiments. As for blood magic, he had some idea. After all, it was magic in the end. A purification bath is the most effective. However, the blood must be special or must possess magical properties, which is not difficult. I can use animal blood and put a vitality potion in each bath. Cadmus looked at the colorless poison before him with a smile. He liked this. Solving things easily wasn't his style. Chapter 17, The Poisoning Case. When Cadmus left his room, he walked down the corridor, ready to meet the king, when he stopped and saw a boy in front of him. Black hair with some white streaks, he had deep purple eyes that resembled Rhaegar's eyes. He looked very thin, silent, and taciturn, especially holding a large book in his arms as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Behind him, a Kingsguard knight in his polished white armor. The man was tall and had a serious and cold demeanor. Brown hair and eyes, his gaze was cold and piercing like a sword, something all members of the Kingsguard possessed. It was Jono Thor Darry, Rhaemon's cousin and brother of Willem Darry, the man who took care of Daenerys and Viserys in exile in Essos, master-at-arms of the Red Keep. Honestly, House Darry was truly blessed with many positions at court. The 3 members of House Darry held high positions at court. Cadmus smiled and greeted the little prince. "Hello, little prince, I am Cadmus Peverell, your father's court mage." As far as Cadmus knew, the king had 5 children. 3 boys and 2 girls. With Queen Elia, Rhaegar fathered Princess Rhaenys, and Crown Prince Aegon. With Queen Lyanna, Rhaegar fathered Prince Macar, Prince Gaemon, and Princess Naerys. The one standing before Cadmus was precisely Prince Gaemon, who was known at court as silent, taciturn, and an avid reader and library frequenter. In the eyes of the court people, a true bookworm. The prince's eyes blinked twice, surprised by Cadmus's introduction. He looked at Jono Thor, and seeing the Kingsguard knight nod his head, confirming the words of the man before him, Gaemon spoke in a courteous and polite tone. "It's a pleasure, Lord Peverell." Gesturing for the prince to join him for a walk, Cadmus looked at the book in the little prince's arms and asked with a smile. "Do you love knowledge, my prince?" Gaemon nodded his head but didn't speak. He looked discreetly at Cadmus as if to ask something, but out of shyness, he didn't ask anything. Noticing the prince's glances, Cadmus laughed. He liked children who sought knowledge. He looked at the prince and spoke in a gentle tone. "One of my duties is to assist the king in magical matters, including knowledge. My role extends to the members of House Targaryen." Gaemon gathered courage with Cadmus's words and asked in a slightly embarrassed tone. "Are the books containing magical knowledge interesting?" "Very interesting," Cadmus said with a smile. He could see the child's eyes shining with a thirst for knowledge that he knew very well, as it was the same look he had when delving into magic books. "There is the knowledge of potions. Some can save lives, others can even control luck itself. There is the knowledge of runes that serve to create items with all possible magical effects. And most importantly, there is the knowledge about magic," Cadmus explained to the young prince with an amused smile. "With magic, it is possible to tame the forces of nature like fire, earth, water, wind, even elements like lightning, light, and shadows. There is the magic of transfiguration, capable of changing the matter of an object into whatever you simply imagine. There are magics for all kinds of things, from a simple magic to unlock a lock to a magic capable of controlling space and time." The more Cadmus spoke, the more Gaemon's eyes shone. There was a deep eagerness for knowledge. "Are you interested?" Cadmus asked, even knowing the answer. "If you are a common person, there wasn't a single person who could refuse to learn magic." Gaemon nodded his head and for the first time in a long time, spoke with such a determined tone that it made Jono Thor Darry look surprised at the young prince. "If your father allows it, come to my room and I will begin your studies," Cadmus said with a smile. For the first time, he felt a weight on his shoulders. Perhaps it was something every novice teacher felt when thinking about giving lessons for the first time. Seeing that he had arrived at the king's chambers, Cadmus looked at Gaemon and said in a gentle tone, "I will meet with your father. I hope for good news, young prince." Having said that, he didn't wait for Gaemon's answer and arrived at the door, where Arthur and Barristan were guarding. Cadmus didn't even need to speak, as Arthur had already spoken. "The king awaits you, Lord Peverell." Cadmus nodded and entered the room, where, surprisingly, he found Rilla next to her son. The woman was helping her son deal with some state affairs and even advising him, just as Alice Anne, the good queen, once did alongside her husband/brother, Jaehaerys I. Barristan and Arthur entered the room, closed the door, and then locked it, making the atmosphere slightly tense. Looking at the relaxed expression of the Dowager Queen, Cadmus felt that the conversation would be difficult, as it seemed Rhaegar had not mentioned the poison. Feeling all the lightness he had from the conversation with Gaemon disappear, he showed a solemn expression and greeted both of them. "Good evening, Your Grace, Queen Rilla." "Cadmus, your arrival surprised me." Rilla looked surprised at the handsome young man and spoke in a gentle, yet noble and graceful tone. "Unfortunately, I don't come with good news," Cadmus said with an imposing tone. He looked at the king with a touch of accusation, as if blaming Rhaegar for not preparing the ground and calming the queen. In the face of his young minister's accusing eyes, Rhaegar pretended not to notice and then feigned a cough, making Rilla show a confused expression. "I presume you succeeded?" Demonstrating a solemn expression, Rhaegar asked with a hopeful tone. "Yes, but it wasn't as easy as I thought. The poison is more potent and volatile than expected. I will have to use blood magic to cleanse the poison from the king's and the Dowager Queen's bodies." Cadmus spoke in an equally solemn tone. Rilla finally understood Cadmus's words and looked at Rhaegar with a shocked and worried look. "Rhaegar, you..." Knowing that he was also poisoned, Rhaegar closed his eyes for a moment and remembered his sons and daughters. Of all his sons and daughters, only Gaemon and Naerys were born with fragile health, especially Naerys, who couldn't even leave her bed without starting to cough violently. Rhaegar felt his blood boil, a fury ran through his veins like magma from a volcano. He wanted to destroy everything and everyone at that moment. But, when he opened his eyes again, there was only a depth in his gaze that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. "What is happening?" Rilla asked with a tone full of concern, especially after learning that Rhaegar was poisoned. She didn't even care about her own condition. Barristan and Arthur squeezed the hilts of their swords so hard that their fingers were pale. They had failed. They had not only failed the king but everyone around him. The members of House Targaryen were poisoned, and they had no idea this had happened. Rhaegar looked at his mother and felt the words stuck on his lips. He never felt that words were so difficult to utter. However, seeing his mother's eyes, he knew she had the right to know, and the culprits who made her lose so many sons and daughters, so many miscarriages and stillbirths. "Mother." Rhaegar began to say what Cadmus had said before. The more she listened, the more Rilla's expression changed from concern to total paleness. She staggered and held her chest tightly. If it weren't for Arthur being quick, the Dowager Queen would have fallen to the floor with such a shocking revelation. Rilla felt her world go blank. Even breathing became difficult. The memory of the miscarriages passed through her mind, the pain she felt, the desolation, the anger, the resentment towards the gods, and the deep sadness. She remembered the babies she held who died in her arms, whom she personally buried and burned the funeral pyres. The small, delicate, but cold bodies. Shaina, Durin, Aegon, Jaehaerys. Rilla murmured the children's names with such great sadness that it made Cadmus feel an enormous weight on his shoulders. Rhaegar clenched his fists and bit his lips hard. Hearing the names of his brothers and sisters made him feel the fury bubbling in his chest again. Arthur helped the Dowager Queen sit on the couch while showing deep sadness in his gaze. Seeing a mother mourn for her sons and daughters with such pain was so sad that he would rather be on the battlefield than see something like that again. Rhaegar, how could they do such a monstrosity? They were children, innocent children, so fragile and delicate. Rilla murmured with a tone full of sadness, without a hint of anger in her tone. She was so sad that she couldn't even feel angry at that moment. "I swear, they will pay for every life and Targaryen blood spilled." Rhaegar spoke in a terribly cold tone. Rilla didn't answer. She didn't have the strength for such a thing. At that moment, she was just remembering her dead sons and daughters. Chapter 18, The Poisoning Case. Cadmus let out a sad sigh seeing the woman still stunned and with an inexpressive face, but he had work to do. He took a step forward and said in a lower tone, he didn't want to bother Rilla in that state. "Your Grace, to perform the removal of the poison, I need animal or human blood, it doesn't matter." Rhaegar frowned for a moment and nodded his head. A lot of blood? He asked in a calm tone. Since it's possible that all members of House Targaryen, including the two queens, were poisoned, I will need 200 or 300 liters of blood. Cadmus said in an equally calm tone. He added, if it were human blood, I would only need a few dozen liters. Rhaegar frowned again, but shook his head. The king spoke. If it were in King's Landing, it would be possible to use human blood. There are many rapists and murderers imprisoned, who have been condemned to death, but we are in the Riverlands. Cadmus understood the implications, although he felt he would have much more work with animal blood. As for any apprehension about using rapists and murderers, he was no saint, and this type of people served especially for experiments and sacrifices. What could they say, right? If rapists knew the meaning of no, the world would turn upside down. I will order the animals to be sacrificed for the banquet. No one will suspect that House Targaryen is using blood magic. Rhaegar said in a calm tone. He didn't want to cause too much gossip among the common people, especially at this moment. Cadmus nodded and said calmly, when I have the blood in hand, I will begin the preparations for the bath. Bath? Rhaegar asked with a strange expression on his face. He hoped it wasn't what he expected from his words. Yes, bath. The king has to bathe in blood. Cadmus confirmed Rhaegar's suspicions with a casual look, as if it were nothing much in his eyes. However, seeing the strange expression on Rhaegar's face, he added calmly, don't worry, there won't be any bad smell. I will add some air fresheners. Apart from the texture, the king won't even notice he's bathing in blood. Rhaegar's lips twitched abnormally. He would like to tell Cadmus that bathing in blood is not something so common, but seeing his casual look, he knew that the boy was beyond help and had some strange thoughts. I know that you mages are quite exotic, with certain strange habits, but I don't want to see any very exotic experiments. Rhaegar said in a calm tone, but anyone could see the king's expression of helplessness. I am different from the mages of Essos. I am not a barbarian who thinks that magic is chaos and madness. My branch of magic is solid and doesn't need those kinds of things. Just imagine mages like me as maestas versed in much knowledge. Cadmus said with a touch of displeasure in his voice. Being compared to the barbarian mages of Essos left him quite dissatisfied. Rhaegar nodded his head and let out a sigh of relief. He really didn't want to wake up to the news that there were chimeras and other scary things roaming the city. Seeing Rhaegar relieved, Cadmus rolled his eyes and felt that he was still being insulted by being compared to the barbarian blood mages in Essos. Of all the paths of magic, blood magic was considered the most barbaric because it used blood, at least in the eyes of the people. At the same time, unlike the world of Harry Potter, magic in this world is divided into rigid and clear classes. Blood mages, fire mages, water, earth, wind, and others. Each person could only specialize in one element. Which, honestly, created specialists in specific areas, but when it came to comprehensive knowledge, these mages were completely incompetent. Cadmus was especially good at elements. He could control all elements, transfiguration, potions, and alchemical items. His knowledge of runes was also extraordinary. Cadmus felt that Dumbledore still owed him a medal for being the best interdimensional student at Hogwarts. If he could go to Hogwarts, he would ask for a medal for being the best student Hogwarts has ever seen, even better than Tom Riddle. Of course, Voldemort would be vehemently against it, but Cadmus didn't care at all about the coward who feared death more than anything. I will withdraw, my king. Cadmus said in a solemn tone. He looked at Rilla, who was still silent, and let out a sigh. Rhaegar would really have a lot of work to do to get the queen to smile again. After all, any mother would be heartbroken to know that her sons and daughters were murdered, some who couldn't even develop properly in the womb. Rhaegar noticed Cadmus's look and also let out a sigh, but he couldn't be in mourning like his mother. His mourning would come in a different way. He would make everyone pay, and his enemies would see blood and fire before death. Cadmus left the room and heard the door behind him close with a heavy sound. Thinking about Rilla, he felt sorry for the woman, but knew it was not appropriate to say anything. I have to create some items that protect the king's safety, as well as warn that there are enemies nearby. Cadmus felt that being the court mage was tiring work, but he seemed more motivated than ever before. Taking a step forward, Cadmus approached back to his room. Feeling the firm ground again, Cadmus envied the portal magic of the Witcher and Marvel world. This type of magic was really more comfortable than being squeezed through a channel in time and space. Sitting on the couch, Cadmus began to think about how he would do things. There were plans for everything related to the future in his mind. He was always this type of person, who liked to plan the future. This provided many good things in his life. This habit didn't change when he arrived in this world. Cadmus stood up, went to the desk in the room, and took out a black candle that looked like it was made of glass, but was made of obsidian. Glass candles, famous during Old Valyria, were an extremely useful magical item. It could project its own image to other glass candles regardless of the distance. In short, they were magical webcams. Lighting the glass wick, Cadmus saw the heat emanating from the candle move the air, where it transformed into a square. The image of a woman with long black hair and red eyes appeared in the air. The woman was almost naked, with only a thin bathrobe covering some parts of her body. "Did I interrupt your bath, milady?" Observing the beautiful body before him, Cadmus said with a laugh. The woman casually put on the bathrobe, although the robe itself only enhanced the beautiful curves and made things only more tempting. "It's been a while, Cadmus, still in your lonely tower?" the woman asked with an elegant and graceful smile. "I'm in Harrenhal. Working for the king is tiring, my dear friend." Cadmus spoke in a playful tone as he watched the woman sit on a red couch and cross her legs. When she crossed her legs, he glimpsed something, but it was only a fleeting glance. He knew the woman was trying to seduce him, but he didn't let himself fall for her charms. The woman raised her eyebrow and her dignified and beautiful face showed a happy expression. "You became King Rhaegar's court mage?" "Yes." Cadmus didn't hide it and said with a smile. "That's great." The woman showed a satisfied look, as if she was very happy with such good news. "I'll get straight to the point." Showing a solemn expression, Cadmus lost the smile on his face and spoke in a calm tone. "The king is preparing to face the fate of the Seven." When Cadmus said this, the woman's red eyes seemed to burn with crimson flames. Her lips curled into a smile. "Since I can't just burn down Old Town, I thought of you, my lovely high priestess of Volantis." Cadmus said with a smile. "I will speak with the king and he will allow the creation of a red temple in King's Landing. I don't need to explain the implications of this." Cadmus said with a smile. The woman before him knew that he was using the Red Faith to fight the Faith of the Seven, but this was insignificant compared to the permission to expand the Red Faith on the continent of Westeros. Of course, Kinvara knew this, but she didn't care. The Red Faith fought against other religions in Essos, and it would be no different in Westeros. She was more than satisfied with the permission to expand to Westeros. "I expect good news, Cadmus," Kinvara said with a smile. "I will prepare 20 ships with priestesses, fiery hands, and red priests. All free men and women, no slaves." Cadmus added in a solemn tone, he was against slavery and Westeros was also against it, so there could be no slaves on the ships. "Don't worry, they will all be free men and women," Kinvara said with a smile. Cadmus nodded and with his hand, extinguished the fire on the wick of the glass candle. Chapter 19, The Tournament at Harrenhal. At night, House Targaryen was gathered, eating around a long rectangular table. With the exception of Princess Naerys, who was bedridden in King's Landing, all of Rhaegar's sons and daughters were present at dinner. Rhaegar looked at his sons and daughters with a deep gaze, but behind the depth, there was a deep-seated worry. Especially looking at his son, Aegon. The boy had inherited nothing from his Dornish descent, white skin, silver hair, and lilac eyes. However, Seeing his thin body, without any muscle or even any masculinity, Rhaegar's worry increased. Aegon didn't train, and when he did, it was only for a few minutes before giving up. This wouldn't be a problem if he were good in his private lessons, but the boy didn't even manage that. It wasn't that his son was stupid, but he was simply too lazy to study, regardless of the punishments, reprimands, or chastisements Rhaegar gave. This was already making the king completely fed up with so much ignorance. The kingdom was on the brink of a civil war, and the heir didn't even know how to fight or care to study. Could such a prince truly be king? Was Rhaegar confident that Aegon would control the vassals if he eventually died? The answer was a resounding no. Although Aegon had the support of Dorne, that was it, only the support of Dorne. By the other noble houses, especially those of the Stormlands, Aegon was simply ignored as an heir. His Dornish heritage was a stigma for all the seven kingdoms. Sighing, Rhaegar looked at his other sons, Macar and Gaemon, both young boys, one 13 and the other 10 years old, respectively. Compared to Aegon, Macar was a prodigy with the sword and was preparing to win the title of Knight of the Tourney of Harrenhal. Although he wasn't as studious, he wasn't bad and received praise from his teachers. Gaemon was the complete opposite of Macar. He was a scholar from head to toe. Since he had a weak body, he never picked up a sword, but he was extremely intelligent and was simply praised as a prodigy by the maesters. Honestly, Macar would be a good king and Gaemon a hand of the king. Gaemon was fine, as he could be the hand of the king, but unfortunately, Macar was not born before Aegon, so he was only second in the line of succession to the throne. This brought a great headache to Rhaegar. He couldn't simply make Macar the crown prince. This would shake his government and make countless noble houses dissatisfied, as they followed the law that the firstborn was the heir. What example would this set for the sons of countless noble houses? It could be said that it would cause countless brothers to fight for the title of lord. After all, if the king's second son could be king through ability, they could too. That's why Rhaegar had never deposed Aegon from the title of Crown Prince and Prince of Dragonstone. He would not plunge the continent into chaos, especially with a decision that would make him lose the loyalty of countless noble houses. Suddenly, noticing an empty chair, Rhaegar put aside his thoughts about the Crown Prince and asked with a dissatisfied tone. "Where is Viserys?" Rhaenys, who was eating elegantly, commented casually. "He went to the brothel in Harrentown." Rhaegar's face darkened in an instant. His brother had received the title of Prince of the Roses, but it wasn't because he had roses on his armor or shield, but simply because he spent his days drunk and in brothels. "Dany, didn't you stop him?" Rhaegar spoke to Daenerys, who pretended to be invisible before her older brother's penetrating gaze. "Brother, do you think I can control Viserys?" Daenerys said with an equally helpless tone. She tried to stop Viserys, but only received a push aside and some sarcastic comments. Rhaegar frowned and sighed again. After he had imprisoned his father, King Aerys II, in one of the towers in the Red Keep, the relationship between the two brothers was completely gone. Viserys called him a usurper and a jailer for deposing and imprisoning his own father. When Rhaegar had an expression full of helplessness with so many problems and worries, his son's voice pulled him out of the state of deep thought. "Father." Rhaegar raised his head and looked at Gaemon, who was staring at him with an expectant look. "What is it, my little prince?" Rhaegar asked with a smile. Gaemon was one of the few children who didn't cause him problems. "I found Lord Peverell, the court mage." When Gaemon spoke, everyone's eyes were surprised, especially Rhaegar. "He told me that if I wanted to learn magic, I would have to have my father's permission." Gaemon was not indecisive, and despite feeling a little shy being the focus of everyone, he spoke with a tone full of hope. "Magic?" Aegon was surprised. He knew nothing about what Gaemon was talking about, just like Rhaenys, Daenerys, and Macar. Only the two queens present, the king's guard, the hand of the king, and the king himself knew about Cadmus. "He said you could learn." Rhaegar ignored everyone's surprised eyes and was even more surprised by Gamon's words. In Rhaegar's eyes, as in all the noble houses of the world, Cadmus would guard his knowledge for the use of his future descendants. The king never thought that Cadmus would actually pass on his knowledge to others who were not of the future House Peverell. If I had father's permission, yes. Gamon nodded and replied with a tone still full of expectation. Can I, father? Rhaegar thought for a moment and replied with a solemn tone. Yes, you can. In his eyes, if Gamon became a mage, he could have the power to protect House Targaryen should anything happen to him or Cadmus. This was a good thing, not to mention Cadmus's knowledge of potions, which was a gold mine. How could he forbid Gamon from getting such a precious opportunity? As for what the church thought of a prince mage, Rhaegar wouldn't give a damn. He had already decided to fight the faith of the seven. What was one more sin in the eyes of the seven? 5. Is he serious? Magic. Should I prepare a stage for a show? Aegon said with an amused tone, clearly thinking his younger brother had been tricked by some charlatan, as his father could accept a mage at court. Gamon is right. I recently accepted a mage into my court. He is Lord Peverell and will be responsible for the protection of the king and the royal family and mystical matters involving magic. Rhaegar drank some wine and spoke with a calm tone. Daenerys couldn't help but remember the mysterious man wrapped in an emerald cloak that Sir Arthur guided to the king's chambers. Her curiosity, which was already great, reached its peak at this moment. She had so many questions in her mind, but instead of asking Rhaegar, she decided to ask the court mage personally. Rhaenys was equally curious about the mysterious court mage. She looked at her aunt and saw her bright gaze. The princess immediately knew what her aunt was thinking and smiled. She had similar thoughts. After all, he was a mage. Father, the church won't like this at all. It's better to dismiss the mage. Aegon didn't know what his aunt was thinking. He spoke, asking Rhaegar to dismiss the mage. However, to Rhaegar's ears, his son's words sounded more like an order than advice. Aegon. Rhaegar spoke with a calm tone, but it silenced everyone. Even Rhaenys stopped eating. You are not the king. Do not use that tone with me again. His words sounded calm, but they carried a weight that made Aegon's face feel a scorching heat. He felt shame and humiliation at being treated that way in front of his family. Father. When Aegon tried to speak, Rhaegar's voice sounded again. Aegon. It was just his name, but it made Aegon shut up. He lowered his head and clenched his fists. He felt anger, humiliation, and resentment bubbling in his chest. He spoke for the good of the family, but his father simply ignored him and humiliated him in front of the family. Rhaegar clearly saw his son's expression and looked at him with disappointment. It was no secret that House Targaryen was in conflict with the faith of the seven for him marrying twice, but Aegon simply ignored this and focused on what the church would think instead of thinking about what House Targaryen needed. Power to face the church and power to subjugate Houses Arryn, Lannister, Tully, and House Baratheon. Aegon, study before trying to advise anyone. Rhaegar said with a calm tone before continuing to eat with a solemn expression, but the idea of making Makar the heir only grew in his mind. Aegon was incompetent for the throne, and House Targaryen did not need such a king, especially with the fragility of the situation the Seven Kingdoms were in. Aegon did not respond and ate in silence, which made the atmosphere even more tense. Chapter 20, The Tournament at Harrenhal. The next day, Cadmus, who had spent the entire night without sleep, gently placed the glass vial containing another healing potion. When the tourney of Harrenhal began, knights would be injured, and nothing was better for marketing than a grand event where the most influential people on the continent were watching. It could be said that the tournament would be the best way for him to show his skills. When these nobles saw the power of the healing potion, he would profit, and his reputation would also increase enormously. He would be known throughout the continent in the shortest possible time. Let's find the king. Not feeling tired at all, Cadmus murmured as he put all the hundreds of vials into his bag. It was a small amount, but enough to impress the injured nobles during the tournament. Leaving the room, Cadmus suddenly felt a touch of tiredness and yawned as he walked towards the king's chambers. Honestly, he was used to sleeping late or even staying up all night until the next day. A bad habit he brought from Earth. With a snap, a beautiful bird appeared in the air and landed gracefully on Cadmus's shoulder. The mythical bird proudly raised its head and looked at Cadmus with a humanized look of affection and happiness. "Good morning, Mitra." He greeted his companion in arms with a smile. "Do you like the change of scenery?" The bird nodded its head. She really liked seeing a different scenery, especially seeing so many different people. Some of these people were clearly evil, others were neutral, and there were rare people, pure souls, that she really liked to see. Seeing the bird happy with the trip, Cadmus smiled and continued walking towards the king's chambers. Nodding to Baristan, who was guarding the door, as soon as he entered, Cadmus saw that not only the king was there, but the two queens were present, as well as someone unexpected. The white wolf sigil on his clothes and the Valyrian steel sword explained his identity. "Lord of Winterfell, Eddard of House Stark." "Good morning, everyone," Cadmus said with a smile. He looked at the Lord of Winterfell with curiosity and then at the king. Seeing his calm expression, he knew that the conversation was not being pleasant. "This is my court mage, Lord Peverell." Rhaegar introduced Cadmus to Eddard with a calm tone. He really felt a headache talking to this silent wolf. "We have met before, Your Grace," Eddard said with a calm and surprisingly indifferent tone. Without needing the king to ask, he continued speaking. "It was on the king's road, and I didn't imagine he was the court mage. I became the court mage shortly after my arrival, my dear lord," Cadmus said with a smile. He looked at Rhaegar, and seeing the king's helpless look, he knew the reason for the conversation. Eddard was surprised and nodded his head. Focusing on the king again, the Lord of Winterfell spoke with a determined tone. "As I was saying, the North will remain in the North. You will not support me, Lord Stark." Rhaegar narrowed his eyes and asked again. His look was increasingly dissatisfied with the situation he was in. The North was home to a powerful army, which he did not want to fall into Tywin's hands. "We will remain neutral." Eddard spoke again, this time, with a harder and more inflexible tone, which caused Rhaegar a great headache. "May I speak, my king?" Cadmus, seeing the impasse, spoke at that moment, drawing the attention of everyone present. "You may." Rhaegar agreed, with a faint hope in his voice, but not much. Eddard Stark was famous for being someone who did not change his mind. Lord Stark was not prepared to be the Lord of Winterfell, correct? Cadmus asked with a serene tone, making Eddard frown. "Yes. My father trained my brother, Brandon." Even without understanding the purpose of the question, Eddard answered honestly. A trace of sadness passed through his eyes as he remembered his lost father and brother. "Then allow me to offer you a lesson on the cruel politics that govern this continent," Cadmus said, with the same imperturbable calm. "If you believe you can remain neutral in this civil war, you are being naive. And surprisingly foolish, Lord Stark." Eddard frowned even more. Even Rhaegar and Lyanna exchanged surprised glances at Cadmus's cutting frankness. "If you don't choose a side, you will be attacked by both," he continued, completely ignoring the reactions around him. "Even if you swear neutrality, Tywin will not trust you. He will sow chaos in the north, finance your enemies, and instigate a rebellion." Cadmus leaned slightly forward, his voice low and firm. "Then tell me, will you be able to defend the north while a civil war consumes your own lands and Tywin marches his armies towards Moat Cailin? What will happen when Tywin controls the food coming from the south? Your people will starve, you will have no food for your vassals and your own army. If you are asking what will happen, then I answer you, my dear lord, you will die, as will your wife and your sons and daughters, because you have no allies, only enemies." Cadmus said with a calm and indifferent tone. As soon as Cadmus finished speaking, silence hung in the air, only everyone's breathing could be heard. Lyanna felt her heart tighten, hearing Cadmus's words. Eddard clenched his teeth. He didn't want to believe that Tywin would do this, as he himself had sent a raven to the Lord of Casterly Rock, but Cadmus's words were like demonic whispers in his ear, preventing him from dismissing the mage's words. Rhaegar did not speak, only looked at Cadmus with a surprised look. He did not expect a young man of about 20 years old to be so politically intelligent. He looked at the boy with an envious look. If Aegon had this perception, he would wake up every day smiling happily. Eddard finally spoke. He looked into the mage's emerald eyes and then at the king and said with a calm tone, "I cannot answer now, I will give an answer after the tournament, your grace." Having said that, he did not wait for the answer and left with an indifferent expression, but with a hidden worry in his eyes. "Lord Stark, be careful, Tywin Lannister is not a kind person, and you know that more than anyone, he will do everything to make House Lannister survive this civil war." Cadmus spoke to Lord Stark, who stopped his steps, but started walking again the next moment. "Thank you, Lord Peverell." Lyanna spoke with a genuinely grateful tone. She knew that Cadmus's words had impacted Eddard in a shocking way. Elia also looked gratefully at the mage, who was helping her husband. "Don't thank me yet, my queen. Lord Stark still hasn't agreed to ally," Cadmus said with a touch of helplessness. Despite saying those words, he didn't know if Eddard would listen or simply ignore them as if he had never heard them. Making him think about the proposal is already surprising, especially after what my father did to his father and brother. Rhaegar spoke at that moment. His voice was laden with visible tiredness. The children carried the sins of the fathers. This was never so true with him. "If you want my advice, have a private conversation with Lord Stark and show sincerity, as well as the threats that surround him and House Stark. He was trained to be a warrior, not a lord, so he cares more about the feelings of his own family than about House Stark," Cadmus said with a calm tone. Eddard died as a traitor to save his daughters, so the man valued family more than House Stark. In the end, Eddard is not a suitable lord, but a warrior and general. Rhaegar spoke with a calm tone. He felt that he was being too delicate with Eddard. He was afraid of forcing Eddard to the enemy side, but with Cadmus's words, he felt that he could make Eddard ally with him. Cadmus nodded his head. In Westeros, lords valued their own noble houses more than family, which is why even small noble houses could survive for thousands of years and powerful noble houses for tens of thousands of years, like House Dane, which had existed for more than 10,000 years. In the fight to preserve the noble house, everything can be sacrificed. The tournament will start at noon. You will be in the box along with House Targaryen and Tyrell. Rhaegar spoke with a calm tone. Cadmus's eyes shone with a touch of joy. Mountains of gold seemed to manifest on the horizon. "It will be an honor, my king," Cadmus said.